Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Happy New Year for the 12 Heids. This is us back for a new season. And we're going to be we're on our toes tonight, but next week we're going to be joined by Mark Hurst, and we'll be able to talk to him about what's going on. But you're going to hear about later on in this program. How you doing, Mike?
I'm doing fine, Dave. I don't wish people a happy new year because I think we're still carrying part of 2020 and the virus forward with us. Doesn't recognise calendars, but welcome everyone to what I think will be a very, very interesting and I hope successful 2021 for the Yes Movement. Dave, we've chosen to call this programme Questions, and there's a heck of a lot of questions. I did it in the last speed dial we did. I said, right, what happens next? Whether you're talking about the inquiry with Alex Salmon, whether you're talking about Martin Keating's court case, loads and loads of questions, what happens next? What I'd like to start off with is reminding people, though, that we started this off not quite knowing where it was all going to end up, right? We actually thought we might do one every few months or something on random subjects, but it's turned into something else. Could I just say to everyone, if you want to revisit the discussion we had with, say, Craig Murray or with Kenny McCaskill or with the 5 bloggers, we deliberately set up an archive page called 12 Heids. It's not there to actually look for posts or anything. It's just a copy of every single thing we've done since we started. And I think some of it will play its part in what's coming up this year. I started this morning, Dave, and this is where I'm going to start my own thoughts on this. Started this morning by reading a post from Aberdeen Independence Movement. And they were recommending that with everything coming up for May, that we should all start signing up for postal votes. Immediately after that, there was a wee post from someone saying, oh, no, don't do that. They're mucking about with postal votes. And that basically is where I started in all of this. It was a meeting that Andy Anderson spoke at, and a pamphlet, a booklet that he'd issued from a group in Argyll who had done a study into postal voting in 2014. It lay in my desk for a while, and I just decided one day to start doing an investigation into just voting, not whether it was postal voting or anything else, and the amount of interference that could take place. So it took me to reading up in America, and that's very, very current at the moment. It took me to France, took me to Germany, took me into lots of different places. So I decided there was something wrong with the referendums bill that was going through. It was one particular section of it that just struck me as it's not whether or not someone's fiddling something or manoeuvring something. It's what if there is evidence of that? How do we deal with it? What are the provisions for dealing with that? I did a series of videos, and David McGowan from Unchained Media, who helped me do that, decided to interview 2 other people to get another side to the story. One was Martin Day, MP, and the other one was Peter Bell. And Peter Bell raised a good point in relation to this. It's not whether or not there are things going on, it's the degree to which they can actually alter the result. Now, in a referendum 2014, there was a difference between yes and no of about 400,000 people. So are we saying if there was manipulation of some kind, it was enough to make up 400,000 people? Seems unlikely. But we're going to have elections in May. If you cast your mind back, I'll get this right. I can't remember the MP's name, and I can't remember the jurisdiction he was in. But there was a difference in votes between him winning and the people losing. I think it was only 2 or 3 votes.
It was Northeast Fife. It was Stephen Gethens.
That's exactly who it was.
The Liberal Democrat.
Thanks, Dave. So when you're talking about 400,000, that was 10% of the total electorate of 4 million. When you're talking a particular district, 10% could well sway it. So there is a live question as to whether or not there could be manipulation. What I'm going to do with Dave's help, and folks, this could be a wee bit bumpy. I'm going to try and stop speaking and let Dave pull up a graphic which I want to speak to. What I did at the time was, having done the videos, etc., I thought, I'm going to raise this with my own MSP. And I sent him an email, didn't get a reply. Then I sent him a letter, didn't get a reply. So I wrote to the Scottish Government and copied them into the first email and the copy of the letter, didn't get a reply. And I thought, here we go. My experience of these type of things is when an oddball like me comes along and says, I think there's something wrong with the bill you're putting through, you might not get a reply. Basically on the who the hell do you think you are? We know what we're doing. This goes through all the parliamentary procedures. We get it right. We then send it out to the Lord Advocate and other people, and they check it all. And if they think it's all right, it gets royal assent. So I thought, well, what do I do? And I thought, right, I'm going to do a petition. And what you're going to see next is a copy of a page from the Petitions Committee at the Scottish Parliament. What that shows is that the thing was taken fairly seriously. How seriously is what I'm going to say, but basically what you'll see there is that the petition has now been closed. The basis upon which I raised it, that it was in breach of the provisions that we have for looking after ourselves, human rights. And the decision of the committee was it didn't breach human rights. But if you look at the bottom of that graphic, what you'll see is a lot of different interaction with the Law Society, with the Scottish Government, with me making further comments. And what I want you to try and think about in this is what I was talking about earlier, numbers. Politics is about numbers. Win the referendum for yes, you win your independence. It's to do with the numbers involved. So what happens at a referendum, what happens as an election is election officers count all the votes and they tell you the answer to it. You've won, you've lost, who's won, who's lost. What I want to watch now is the reason why the Petitions Committee, in their words, said that the petition was being closed. All 5 members.
On then to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1791, Referendum Scotland Act 2020 by Mike Fenwick. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to recognise and respond to concerns that Section 39 of the Referendum Scotland Act 2020 establishes a legal challenge, namely that it breaches protections afforded by the Human Rights Act 1998. Submissions have been received from the Scottish Government and the petitioner. The Scottish Government submission advises Section 39 specifically relates to court proceedings which are about questioning the number of ballot papers counted or votes cast as certified by a counting officer or by the Chief Counting Officer. Section 39 does not cover court or other procedures relating to concerns relating to campaigning or any other issue. And I wonder if members have any comments or suggestions for action. My own sense, I think, is we've come to a natural conclusion on this one, but I'll call Gail Ross.
Thanks, convener. Yeah, I agree. We've had the response back to say that the 8-week limit only applies to the number of ballot papers counted or votes cast. So the point that the petitioner has brought up is completely unaffected by the 8-week limit. So hopefully that's answered the question. So just to thank them for bringing it forward and to close under Standing Order 15.7. Thanks.
Thank you. Maurice Corrie.
Thank you, convener. Yes, I agree fully with my colleague Ross on that, and I would move to close the petition under Rule 15.7 the standing orders accordingly. Thank
you. David Torrance.
Thank you, convener. I agree with my colleagues, and I'm happy to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of standing orders.
Okay, thank you. Tom Mason.
Entirely, I agree with that. We've gone as far as we can go with this, and you close it down.
Okay. Thank you very much, colleagues. I think that we are agreeing to close the petition. We think we've come to a conclusion. I would say that I think that we as a Petitions Committee did take this seriously and tested the argument that was being proposed by the petitioner, but we are agreeing to close the petition on the basis of the terms that have been put by my colleagues, and we'd want to thank the petitioner for their engagement with the Petitions
What that video shows is that they decided that because the Scottish Government had said Section 39, the actual section I'm arguing about, was only to do with counting votes. Well, I'm not going to swear, but God Almighty, that's exactly what I'm trying to argue about. If you've got that bit wrong and there's no way you can deal with it, then we've got a major problem in our hands. That's exactly what Section 39 was set up to do. You then have the description in the earlier graphic which said this does not breach human rights. So if that's the case, the graphic you're now watching is one of Boris Johnson being taken to court. And if you read it carefully, the reason he's being taken to court is to do with an intelligence committee report from the House of Commons which said Russia interfered with the Brexit election. In their evidence, they also said they interfered with the Scottish referendum in 2014. And the basis that they're taking Boris Johnson to court is human rights. So we now have a conflict between what I'm being told by the Scottish Government and by the committee and what in reality is the actual case. On the very first graphic, the interjection between myself and the Law Society of Scotland, there's actually two parts raised in that. And to try and cut this down, we're not showing you the bits that are involved in it, but if you have the time, Google PE 1791 and you will see what I'm about to say. What the Law Society said in their evidence to the committee was that Section 39, and this is very, very important, in and of itself did not breach human rights. I would agree with that. It doesn't. It's where it leads that causes the problem. Because the Law Society also referred to a case that's been adjudicated at least 10 times in the Supreme Court. It's also been in the European Court of Justice. And what they said was that human rights legislation applies to an election. I'll repeat that. It applies when there's an election. It does not apply when it refers to a referendum. There's a huge, big load of court cases that establish that. So you're in a position where you can't breach human rights if there are no human rights in a referendum. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how you adjudicate whether there's been interference in a count. That's an entirely different subject. What you're looking at now is a graphic which details the Intelligence Committee report. The referendum, where they suggest there was interference in Scotland's referendum, was in 2014. That document was published 6 years later in 2020. We have a situation where evidence related to the numbers and interference might come out long, long after the actual event has taken place, and that's very, very important. What you're now about to see is the committee who closed the petition reacting to me supplying them with the information from the Intelligence Committee, where I said, look, you've got to realise that there's going to be a gap in time between what the event was and when it actually the evidence arises. I want you to listen. I'm not going to speak over. I'm just going to let you listen to the people reacting to that evidence being given to them. And the conclusion they reach is, hang on a minute. Mike's going on about there being only 8 weeks in which we can deal with any evidence. We better ask the government, what happens if the evidence comes out after 8 weeks? I'll let you listen to it.
If we can now move on to the next continued petition on our agenda today, which is petition 1791, Referendum Scotland Act 2020 by Mike Fenwick. The petition calls on the Scottish Government to recognise and respond to concerns that Section 39 of the Referendum Scotland Act 2020 establishes a legal challenge, namely that it breaches protections afforded by the Human Rights Act 1998. Since our last consideration of this petition, we have received submissions from the Law Society of Scotland and the petitioner. The Law Society of Scotland advises it agrees with the opinion expressed by the Scottish Government that the terms of Section 39 do not themselves breach convention rights. The petitioner's submission highlights a report which they believe shows revelations of potential influence and interference occurring, but very noticeably only after a period of years and both well out with a period of 8 weeks. In terms of dealing with this petition, I think we have really examined issues quite seriously. We have interrogated them. My own feeling is that I found the evidence from the Law Society of Scotland compelling, and I think one feeling is, in terms of the usefulness of the role of the Petitions Committee at this stage, is that we could close it, but I'd be interested if there are other views or other things that we might be able to do, or whether people indeed agree that it should be closed. Now I'll call David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. The Law Society of Scotland's submission is overwhelming, so I'm in agreement with you. I think under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders, we should close the petition.
Okay, thank you. Tom Mason.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, the Law Society is very clear what the situation is in terms of the short term. I do worry a bit about the excess of 8 weeks. I mean, the petitioner does have a point in terms of that longer evidence generating, which could well do on a referendum, and there's not a requirement to close everything in the short term. And historically, so I would like to see the Scottish Government justify that there is no problem existing beyond the 8 weeks. I mean, we're happy to receive that and come to a conclusion after that's been received. So ideally, I'd be open for the moment in my view.
Oh, okay, Gail Ross.
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I mean, I think that we have to have faith in the system, and I know that the petitioner has brought up this additional paper and other evidence taken from outside interference. I mean, I would hope that if it had been proven that there had been outside interference in any part of our democratic process, that there would be some sort of recourse, and not just with a referendum. So, I mean, I'm happy enough to get that reassurance as Tom Mason has asked for. But, I think, as I said, it doesn't just apply to referendum, although that is the point that's being brought up. We're seeing more and more accusations of outside interference in many other processes as well. So, I would be interested to see if there was any recourse after the 8 weeks, if more evidence came to light.
Thank you. Maurice, Corey?
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I hear my colleagues say, as I say, I'm minded to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders, but equally, I would be more comfortable if we could address this issue of writing to the Scottish Government to ask for its views in relation to this 8-week period, which Tom Mason and Gail Ross quite rightly have raised. So I would be minded to close the petition once we've got that information in and we're clear we have evidence of it. And that's my view. Thank you.
Okay, I think we've come to a consensus, which is you don't agree with me, but I think that we should. I think I hear what people are saying. I think we want finally to write. So what would be the situation if wrongdoing was established beyond that 8-week period, and then it'll be for the public petitions to think about how they might deal with that response at a later stage. But I think we're agreeing to write to the Scottish Government in those terms. Thank you.
You'll notice as you watch that video that 2 members of the committee seemed reasonably intent in just closing everything down. And that actually was the pattern all the way through all the meetings that they had over this petition. But 3 recognised that there was a question to be answered. What happens after a period of 8 weeks? And I'll come on to where that comes from in a second. One of them clearly identifies, hang on a minute, this just doesn't apply to referendums. It also applies to elections. So it applies to the election that's coming up in May, folks. What you're now looking at is an extract from the coronavirus bill that's currently going through the Scottish Parliament. It's got various things in it. Number one, that the presiding officer could be given the right to postpone the May election for a period of up to 6 months. It's also got the possibility that we might not all vote in one day. It could be spread, all due to the COVID virus. We could maybe be voting in alphabetical order 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. But it also leads on to the fact, and this is where I started, it also leads on to the fact that if conditions don't improve substantially, it could be that we're actually told you're all going to have to use the postal voting system. It won't be discretionary. If you actually go into the memorandum, the policy memorandum on the Parliament website that fits in with that bill, you'll find that there are worries about that, about how long and how many people might actually be willing to fill in the application form, whether they'll then return it in time. So you could well see a reduction in the number of votes if we're all forced to go down a postal vote. You also have the question of what's happening with the SNP, SNP2, 1 and 2 situation, with the other indie parties coming into this. That's also got its own source of confusion. You're now going to watch a short extract from one of the videos I did. It was done way back November 2019. You'll hear me mention 6 weeks. That actually was changed to 8 weeks in the referendum bill. But the 6 weeks are likely to apply to an election in May. So don't disregard that. I'll let you watch what I said, and what I'm arguing is the problem with the current Referendum Act.
Was handed and given to Alex Salmond as part of his judicial review, £500,000. So let's say after the next referendum, someone or groups of people across Scotland have seen something that they think was wrong. Maybe it was the number of postal votes. Maybe it was how they were counted. Maybe like the EU referendum, there's a huge number just haven't been returned. Maybe it's the scale of the number of postal votes, all dealt with in earlier clips. Maybe you have to raise £500,000, hire a QC, and get that all into the Court of Session within a period of 6 weeks. Not 12 weeks to discuss a question and decide on it, 6 weeks. That to me is fundamentally wrong.
What all this boils down to is that if anyone finds evidence, either in a future referendum, and it needn't just be an independence referendum, it could be any referendum, because that's what the Act deals with, or come May, and that's the more likely thing. If anyone sees anything where there's a small majority, say, for someone, and there is doubt as to whether or not the actual count was correct or whether there was manipulation or interference, it'll take you back to the fact that the only way you can deal with it is the gun fires on the day the election is counted. You've got 6 weeks. 6 weeks, that's all. Find all the evidence, put it all together, hire a QC. The QC will tell you it could take quite some time to argue, have you got the funds to deal with it? And those funds, from everything we know, could be substantial. You think of Alex Salmond and £500,000, think of Martin Keating's on his 150,000, think of everything you know about going to court. We're making an awful lot of lawyers. Now, where does that leave me if they've actually closed the petition? It leaves me with questions. One thing I know is that I can re-raise the petition. I can do that immediately after the 6th of May if the election takes place on that day, because it's a whole new parliament. It's highly likely I'll do that, but this time round, it will depend on what happens on the 6th of May. Is there evidence? Because as we stand at the moment, the Act that will govern it will say you've got 6 weeks, raise a lot of money, and get it into the Court of Session. I still think that is as wrong now as I thought it was in November 2019. Dave, I've got other things that I would add to that. I'm not going to. There's other things that you and I already know we've got on the agenda, and this will play its part in that. But I just want people to be aware of the fact that the reason I've never been a member of a political party is exemplified in what I've just said. It's exemplified in how people are being elected to the SNP just now and who wasn't elected, and the actions and reactions to all of that. Same with the NEC. Political parties can be taken over. It happened with the Labour Party under Jeremy Corbyn. It's now changed under Keir Starmer. Somewhere in the middle of all of this, I remember one thing above all of the last 3 years of my life, which is watching crowds of people marching, saying what they wanted, independence, and saying when they wanted it now. This bit I've just done plays its part in that. It won't be obvious why it does, but it's part and parcel of what I'm trying to achieve with you and these broadcasts, is to get the Yes movement gathered together so that we get this country's independence. Sir Alba.
Aye, that's very interesting, Mike. I'd like to add to that that at the moment, both the Tories and the Lib Dems are writing out to people and saying, you should register for a postal vote, fill out the form and send it back to our head offices. Fluffy Junior Mundell has already been caught with and called down by the Electoral Commission. As far as I know, Willie Denny's at it as well. It's like there's every possibility that this election might end up being mostly postal votes. But if it is, and it has to be done, look at the way the Democrats used it in America. Now, I'm not saying that it can't be tampered with, but the bottom line is we need to be organised for it, no matter what way it's going to fall. And if that means that you need to get registered for a postal vote, I think it doesn't matter if the Tories are going to be winning the morning after the county election. At the end of the day, there's a lot more of us, and whatever way we get those votes on, it's important to get done.
It's strange, Dave. I'll just add this. One of the things I did all the way through this from the very start was to say there was an alternative way of addressing this. I won't go into the detail of what it is, but there's a better way of dealing with this rather than saying to people, you've got 6 weeks, raise a lot of money. It's the wrong way of going about it.
Brilliant. Well, I was contacted a couple of days ago by one of your viewers called.
Have we got viewers?
We do. I think we've got at least one anyway.
That was the fact you said it in plural.
Kevin Camper Van Rolink contacted me earlier on this week and says, I'll tell you exactly what he said now if I can find it. He said, the United Nations Charter states clearly that the nation in which the nation is seeking independence from is not allowed under international law to interfere with the domestic process. And I found that quite interesting because I've actually been down this road myself in some of the stuff that I've been looking for other programmes. And it's mostly found in Article 1314. No, 1314, sorry, 1514. I'm getting the wrong 14s. 1514, dealing with colonies. And Scotland's in a sort of dodgy situation here because although we're acting like a colony, although we're treated like a colony, technically we're not because the Treaty Union was a trade treaty. So I carried on this conversation with Kevin. And I says, but I said that there's something else that actually can be used as far as trade treaties is concerned, and that's the Vienna Convention. And I was sitting talking over Mike with this earlier on, but as we were discussing what we're going to be talking about, he goes, "Oh, you've got the Vienna Convention." Just shut up a minute, so I'm getting to that because. It's back to this thing, but we might do things. We come at things from different angles, but very, very often end up in the same kind of place. So anyway, so I basically spent an hour before I went on here today reading the Vienna Convention. And it's no easy. looking for how Scotland could actually use the breach treaty and the walking away from the treaty as a tool to get independence. And then, as I was doing that, Boris Johnson turns up on Mar, and Mar says, "Look, if I'm Scottish and ask you what tools I have to actually walk away from the union," that fat blonde twat turned around and said, "You had it in 2014. Now you don't have one anymore." So I continued reading down the Vienna Convention, and the next thing I find is that although it's there and it mentions the right of self-determination in the Charter right through it, there's a little clause that says, but you can't use it retrospectively for treaties that were actually signed before the action of this declaration. I don't think that the actual Vienna Convention can be used to nullify or to walk away from the Treaty of Union, because it was a couple of hundred years before. The Vienna Convention was 1969 and it came into force in 1980. So it took 11 years for them to actually get that to work. But I don't think you can use it retrospectively. So that's your answer, Kevin. At the moment, I still don't know, and I think if anybody did, well, almost anybody did, would probably be using it. But as I say, if anyone out there's got any other input on that, I'd be very interested to hear it. Indy Truck Davy's pretty good on that. If you're watching, Davy, you could maybe give a wee shout and answer in the comments. So thanks for bringing it to your attention, Kevin. If any have any other questions that you'd like us to delve into in future shows, you're more than welcome to contact us. But this is going to be an amazing month, one way or another. It's going to be a massive month. I decided earlier on in the week that I'd maybe like to talk about what kind of month January is going to be. And I put up a wee post that basically says, well, you've got Alex Salmon giving his evidence to the inquiry. And then you've got Martin Keatings and Craig Murray, both on the same days at courts across the road from each other. One taking on the UK government for Martin Keatings, and the other one, like this, Craig Murray, fighting for his life because he wrote the truth about the Alex Salmon trial. And not only did he do that, but the other people who did were not charged. And then at the end of that, the following week, we've got Nicola Sturgeon giving our evidence to the parliamentary inquiry. Now, since I put that up, people have been contacting me saying, "Oh, you've missed a load of stuff out." And sure enough, so it was. So I discovered that our guest next week, Mark Hurst, is up on the 7th, which I believe is Thursday. So I thought, but I say I didn't know about it. I only found it later. So I apologise, Mark, that it wasn't the original thing. And then I discovered that the Julian Assange verdict is going to be on the 6th. And that's also the day that something's happening in America as well. Well, basically, it's the last chance that the Republicans got to stop on that. And then this morning, it was last night, somebody contacted me and says, but I thought that Alec was giving his evidence and on the 5th. No, definitely not. She said, something's happened the 5th. So I went and checked it. And there you go, Peter Murrell's getting called up again. So he's going to be up this week because they want to question him about certain inconsistencies that he made in his first appearance and in his written statements, both which completely contradict the written statements of the First Minister, his wife. So with all that, I thought, okay, we've got the makings of a good show today, because you've got all this stuff to talk about. And then, first thing is I wake up this morning and I get 4 pages of the Sunday Post because Alex's lawyers are not happy that he's getting a fair hearing by not being able to introduce certain evidence that's happening. So they decided to write straight to the papers to say, well, okay, if he can't produce the evidence, here's some of the questions you should be asking him when he turns up on Tuesday. And needless to say, it's causing the same kind of stushy that anything else would in the Yes movement. Now, by the time this comes out, a wee poll that I'll put up on Twitter, we're recording this on Sunday afternoon. I put a 3-day poll up on Twitter this morning to say, who do you believe lied in the parliamentary inquiry? Peter Murrell, Nicola Sturgeon, both of them, or none of them. Now, you'll be aware that the written statements of Peter Murrell and Nicola Sturgeon both contradict each other as to whether it was a party meeting or whether it was a government meeting at our house on Easter Monday in 2018. There are 18% at last count are saying none of them lied. And yet they can both go onto the government website and see the statements in writing to them from Peter Murrell and Nicola Sturgeon. That's shown some of the problem that's actually going on at the minute. Because at the end of the day, some people believe that the SNP can do no wrong, in spite of the fact that you've got it in black and white from man and wife, that they're both talking complete opposite sides of a coin. So at the end of the day, it's shown that it'll get a wee bit of a problem. So let's move away from Peter Murrell. As I say, history will take care of him. Julian Assange. It's going to be very, very important. The 6th of January, a man who's basically done nothing illegal. I mean, they basically made laws up to get him. They brought out charges that none of the original charges he was arrested on are there anymore. He's now got a completely new indictment, and he could be extradited from the 6th of January. Everybody's hoping that Trump can find something decent, a decent bone in his body, to actually take the stress away and do something that is actually for the American Constitution than against everything that he's ever done. It's important to the whole world that you watch that, particularly if you use social media, because anything that you say on Twitter or Facebook or anywhere else in the future, particularly now that we've left the European Union and all the servers are now going to be held in the US, could have you arrested, sent to the States, extradited, and imprisoned for a lot more time than you would get if you were here. It's very, very important for freedom of speech across the world that the Americans are not allowed to do this. So you should be watching Julian Assange. And then become Mark Hurst. Mark's been on the show twice. Mark's a good guy. Mark made a 2-minute video that he put on YouTube that ended up on Twitter that didn't have that many views, but it had the views, had enough views of the wrong people, because there are eyes on some of us. Everybody knows who took close inspection of what was happening during the salmon process. And strangely enough, every single one of us have been charged, and I include myself in that. So basically, Mark is going to be up in Jedburgh Sheriff Court on the 7th, fighting for his freedom, because he can be jailed for a year for this. And it's utter nonsense. It's a complete made-up charge by the Crown Prosecution Service, not to particularly lock Mark Hurst up, but to shut him up. And as I say, what does have to be done is this corruption inside the Crown Office and Prosecution Service needs to be seriously investigated, and the Lord Advocate needs to do the decent thing and bloody resign. Fast forward a week. This is only the 7th of January. This is only 4 days away. It's only 2 days away by the time you're watching this. So we arrive at the big day. Now, between now and then, I don't know what else is going to come out in the press. I know for a fact that they've been sitting waiting like greyhounds, like at Whitechapel or whatever. Can't remember. Powder Hall. Okay, well, a greyhound at Powder Hall who's heard that the hare's running in it, and you can just see them all champing away, getting ready to run. Okay, so there's going to be all sorts of stuff coming out shortly. And as I say, it's nice to see that Alec lawyers have actually taken the step today to set the ball rolling. I know there's an awful lot of relief going on in a lot of places, and I know there's an awful lot of nerves going off in some other ones. We don't know what Alec's going to say, but if you remember when he left the court after being acquitted, those trumped up charges, that he said that the evidence would be brought to light, but not today. Well, the evidence is going to be brought to light a week on Tuesday. A week on Tuesday. 2 weeks on Tuesday. It'll be 2 weeks today, but think I'm watching this. So and then if any remember the videos that I did as the court was happening, the day Alec had given evidence, I came out of the High Court. I might have a wheel, you can see if I can find that and put it on to the end of this. I came out of the High Court. He still hadn't been found innocent or guilty. So he'd just given his evidence. And I said then that he was going to get acquitted, and the heads high up in the SNP were going to roll right as high as it can go. And I believe that now more than ever. At the time, I didn't believe Nicola Sturgeon was involved. Now I do. I'm sorry, but as I say, she's either in it up to her neck or she's a complete moron, and I do not believe Nicola Sturgeon's a moron. So we pass that, and then we're going to be coming along to what I think the whole, well, at least 10,000 people in Scotland who actually paid for the privilege, and a lot of other people who haven't, are going to be looking forward to Martin Keating's case, in spite of having had the weight of the British state thrown at it to have it thrown out, is going to start taking place in the Court of Session. To the best of my knowledge, although Martin's been very, very cagey with his information, to the best of my knowledge, I believe that the UK government are taking the same route that they took with the Whiteman case that went eventually to the European Court, as in try at every step to get it thrown out, but don't put up any arguments against it. And if that's the case, then barring some jiggery pokery with the actual legal system itself, Martin Keating's is going to win probably the most important legal battle for Scotland in its history. In its history. So we'll be looking forward to that. And at the same time, as I say, I'll be sitting watching or listening to that in my right ear, and in my left ear, I'm going to be listening to Craig Murray's case across the road. I'm very, very interested in that because I was with Craig when he was arrested. Well, I was with Craig when he was thrown out of the court anyway. And it's like it was a really, really bad situation. Given the fact that Craig's actually been charged with this and could end up like going to jail for 2 years. Given the fact that another reporter in the court actually named one of the witnesses who was given a slap on the wrist and told not to report anymore. I don't know if he's aware of that, but that's true. So Craig's in a situation where he's been refused access to documentation that he knows exists, he's seen exist, but the Crown are refusing to release it to him. And that, I believe, is something that could go in his favour, because if the Crown have acted with any impropriety, not that that's an unusual thing with the Crown these days, then the case against Craig needs to be thrown out. But as far as I know, the last thing I heard was that they didn't actually have a particular definition for what jigsaw evidence was. So I'm hoping that Craig's going to walk free for that as well. And finally, Nicola Sturgeon has been saying ad nauseum that she's looking forward to her day in front of the inquiry so she can give her side of the story. Well, I'll tell you a wee story just before I go into that. I was sitting through the Salmon trial, and somebody else who was due to be one of the last witnesses for the prosecution was a guy called Ian McCann. Most in the SNP will know him. He's also known as the Guardian of Secrets. Don't been guarding him very well though. He was due to be the last witness for the prosecution. And by the time they got to him, his evidence had been so completely, utterly destroyed by the previous witnesses that had been on in that court that the prosecution eventually didn't call him. Nicola Sturgeon is not going to have that advantage. She's been hung out to dry by her own husband. She's been hung out to dry by her own permanent secretary. Our Deputy Prime Minister has managed to protect her by stopping her Chief of Staff from being able to appear because it would be against the Civil Servants Code, in spite of the fact that Leslie Evans has appeared 3 times and she's the head of the Scottish Civil Service. So John Swinney, you've done all right. You've done all right. You've managed to help prevent damage. But there's been enough witnesses already to either basically destroy the Scottish Civil Service, which for me needs a certain revamping anyway, destroy Peter Murrell and Ian McCann, and destroy Nicola Sturgeon. And say, okay, you should have, Nicola's will only be independent. The SNP are the vehicle independence. The SNP have got a driver at the minute who's fallen asleep at the wheel. And as far as I'm concerned, when Nicola Sturgeon gives her evidence, I'll be looking for one thing. Well, I'll be looking for a couple of things actually, but here's one thing. She said it was a party meeting at her house on April the 2nd. Her husband says it wasn't. Her husband says he wasn't there, but then he was there. This is all a matter of public record. It's all in the inquiries. So let's assume that Nicola's telling the truth, and there was a party meeting. Why was Peter Murrell not allowed to be at it? And 2, why were her chief of staff, Alex former chief of staff, and Alex lawyer at that same meeting? Because civil servants are not allowed to have anything to do with party stuff. That was stuff that came out during the Salmon trial, that basically civil servants have to completely stay clear of party matters. You've got special advisors who are paid for by the civil service, but who can act in party matters, but civil servants themselves are not. So basically, if this was a party thing, there is no reason at all that there should have been civil servants present at it. If it was not a party thing, and Peter Murrell is telling the truth, then it was a government meeting. If it was a government meeting, then there have to be minutes. Where are the minutes? You can't have it both ways. One is either right and one is wrong, or both are wrong. They can't both be right. It's not possible. So basically, that's the first thing. The second thing is, on the 8th of January 2019, at 4:16 p.m, Nicola Sturgeon stood up in front of the Scottish Parliament and said that the first time she knew anything about the salmon thing was on April the 2nd, 2018 at her home in Glasgow. Now, she's since come back and says, oh, she did find out about it 4 days before, after evidence for Jeff Aberdeen came out. She said that she'd heard about it 4 days before, and it just slipped her memory because she was so busy with all the other things. It slipped her memory that her mentor and friend of 30 years had been involved in sexual offences against staff in the Parliament. Of course it did. But if we go a little bit deeper into that, our private secretary appeared a couple of weeks later, and he said that the original meeting with Jeff Aberdeen and Liz Lloyd and Nicola Sturgeon had been in the First Minister's diary, and then it disappeared. The only people who could have access to that diary apart from him were Liz Lloyd, Chief of Staff, and Nicola Sturgeon, FM. He did not know who. He said it wasn't him that removed it, so it was one of the other two. Let's go a little bit further, going back to the statement that was made in Parliament on January the 8th. A couple of days later, the statement made a question to Richard Leonard. The Labour Party put in a Freedom of Information request. This Freedom of Information request then asked for a confirmation of when the First Minister first found out about Alec making about the whole Alec Salmon situation. To which Liz Lloyd, Chief of Staff for the First Minister, said the first the First Minister knew about it was on Easter Monday at the First Minister's house in Glasgow, and that was it. And it was signed off by Nicola Sturgeon. So, if, as Nicola says, that she had slipped her memory in the Parliament a few days before, and it only burned herself into her memory at the meeting at her house, then fair enough. Why then, a couple of days later, when she discovered that she made a mistake, did she get her Chief of Staff to answer a Freedom of Information request and then send it out? Because she didn't know what Jeff Aberdeen's evidence was going to be. So she backtracked on it. But let's go a little bit further. 5 months ago, until 5 months ago, that Freedom of Information request was available on the government website. And guess what? It vanished. It vanished. So it's no longer there. You can't check it anymore. But Jackie Bailey, if you're watching this, it was sent to your boss, Richard Leonard, and it proves completely that there was skullduggery between Liz Lloyd, who's not been called in front of the thing due to John Swinney keeping her away, and Nicola Sturgeon. You check it. The Labour Party asked for it. It's there. January is going to be an amazing month, guys. I believe we need to go forward for independence now. I've given you information now that can be, oh, that's absolutely bloody terrible. It's shocking, all this stuff. Every single bit of information that I've just given you, every single member of the press already know, because they sat in the same court as I did, and they're waiting to explode it 14 days before a referendum and an election. If you've got cancer at the root, you need to remove it at the choice of your time. You need to do it on a battleground of your choosing, and not wait to allow the advantage to go to the enemy. This is all black and white. It's all a mark of public record. Check it for yourselves.
Hey, can I chuck in two things, Dave? Let you have a wee relax. Folks, we called this questions, and I think you'll understand now. When we had the 5 bloggers on, I always remember something Peter Bell said, that the purpose of bloggers was to ask awkward questions. And I always think the awkward was in the wrong place. It's the part of bloggers that ask questions. It's the answers that are awkward. And that's what we're facing over the course of this month. Second thing I would chuck in, Dave, is very simply, we should be aware that the newly elected NEC will also have their questions they're looking at. What happened to funds for an independence referendum? How much can they afford to pay people? There's a whole bundle of things going to come out the woodwork in the course of the next 30 odd days. But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that there are people who are not aware, and I don't know why they're not aware of the problems that are maybe going to beset us. But I'm satisfied, no matter what comes out of this, that the Yes movement know there is only one thing we should be focused on: gaining this country's independence. No matter the problems and the SH1T that hits the fan, that's what we've got to be concentrating on. With that, I'll say thanks very much to everyone that's tuned in. Be aware there's a lot more interesting stuff to come out. Dave posted something the other day where he said, Mike Fenwick asked me to rewrite a song. And Mike Fenwick's got a wee plan that he's not telling anyone about. That'll come out in the course of the next things. I hope it's going to help us all. With that, I'll say, Sir Alba.
Thanks for tuning in, guys. It's going to be a busy new year. We've all got different ideas about how things should go. We've got different ideas of how we go for independence. But at the end of the day, no matter who's right and who's wrong, we're all going to vote yes. And as I say, we don't have any other choice, really, because if we don't, we're all going to die. And we're far too brilliant to die, particularly with the neighbours we've got. Talk to you later. Cheers.